And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, if I trim back my neighbor's tree that's hanging over my fence, will he tackle me on stage? And if Vladimir Putin can claim victory in his war against Ukraine, how about I head over to the pub and celebrate today's office work I successfully avoided? And now, the podcast host who never avoids work, especially when it involves his own cleanly shaven body, Pete Dominic.
That is accurate again, Pico. Takes a lot to get this body as sleek as a baby dolphin. It does. All I've got is eyebrows, folks. You didn't need to know that. I didn't want to tell you, but Pico started it. I'm sorry. For him, not for me. My response is honest and transparent, as always. He put me up to it. Hi, and welcome to today's show. It is episode 600 of this show, and I do have a lot to say about that, but I just want to say one thing, which is thank you. I love what I'm doing. I love my work. More than anything else, I love that you appreciate it and learn along with me every day as a result of it. I love this community that we have built together. I love the purpose this program drives me for every day. And I love so many of you, seriously and honestly, that I've gotten to know better and better over the last 2 years. And so I don't have anything special other than the Thursday night hangout where I'm hoping a few of our favorite guests will drop in and make surprise cameos. Show 500, I asked people to call in and leave voicemails. That was fun. But show 600 is no different than necessarily any other show, which is I think I found two amazing guests, had great conversations with them, edited them neatly and nicely for your listening pleasure, and have a great news update as I do Monday through Thursday. That's what I do. That's what I keep wanting to do. I want to post more video. I want to go live. I want to have a gathering in different places across the country. I've got all kinds of ambitions that remain, but work-life balance is such an important thing to me, too. And while I look for help and hope I can afford it, I will keep banging these shows out each and every day, and I cannot do it without your support. So here on Show 600, I just ask if you haven't signed up for a paid subscription yet, please do now. StandUpWithPete.com for more on that, or just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic and sign up now. Join us at our happy hour hangouts on Thursday nights, anytime on the Discord platform where you can text, voice, or even video chat with other stand-up subscribers. And now I think let's do the show, because I have two amazing guests joining me today. Longtime columnist and commentator and award-winning journalist and author Jonathan Alter joins me today. We had a great conversation I think you're really going to like. And for the first time, the Democratic nominee, she will be soon, for governor in Iowa, Deirdre DeJear, is joining me. And I think you're really going to like this woman and our conversation. She's a black woman who grew up in Mississippi and in Oklahoma, lost her mom when she's 8 years old, put herself through college, started a business, became very successful, married with dogs, and young and ambitious and passionate and super smart, charismatic. And I loved talking to her with a great sense of humor. I think you're going to really enjoy our conversation and want to support her any way you can. Jonathan Alter, Deirdre DeJear for the first time, and you. So let's get to the news. That's what we do at the beginning of each and every day show, about 20 to 35 minutes sometimes, maybe a little more, of well-chosen audio clips and news headlines to give you as much of what I think is in the public's interest, in your interest, and a perspective on it as I possibly can in that amount of time. All right, let's do it. It's called The Last 24. All right, well, here are your sound bites and headlines for the 10th of May, 2022. There are 183 days until the midterm elections, and we are 1 week away from Board of Education election in my town of Clarkstown, New York. Next Tuesday, big day for us here, and can't wait till it's over because it has been ugly. All right, well, what have I for you? Let's start with the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, gave a defiant speech on Victory Day, but didn't threaten escalations in Ukraine, declare victory there, or call on Russians to broadly mobilize, as officials feared. Instead, according to the New York Times, he told Russian people to keep living their lives as troops battle for the motherland, though he again falsely depicted his invasion of Ukraine as a struggle against Nazism. Ukraine, on their end, observed the idea with little fanfare, and their president, Volodymyr Zelensky, released a video to rebut Putin's claims and said very soon there will be 2 victory days in Ukraine, telling his people on Monday they would prevail over Russian invaders, assuring them their land was, quote, sown with bullets and shells, but no enemy was able to take root here. So that was obviously a pretty big story yesterday, with more than 90% of results in. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. looks certain to be the next president of the Philippines. The son of the former ousted dictator is on pace for the biggest win in presidential race in the country since the 1980s. So be very interesting to see what happens there. Name recognition, even if your last name is Marcos, which I thought was not the greatest name. What a great job reviving that family name in the Philippines. And I know nothing about what I'm talking about, but that's why I'm going to stop talking and move on to another news story, which is the Pulitzer Prize. They were awarded on Monday to an array of news organizations for investigations that uncovered the tragic toll of the United States air war in the Middle East, exposed the dangers of a Tampa lead smelter, and pieced together the full picture of the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. New York Times won the Pulitzer Prize this year for the most for any outlet, including international reporting, national reporting, and criticism categories. The Washington Post won the public service category, considering the most prestigious of the prizes, for their sprawling chronological examination of what led to the siege on the Capitol building and what transpired during the riot and its aftermath. If you want to see that, by the way, the Washington Post, what they won for, it's called The Attack. And you can learn more, of course, about the Pulitzer Prizes by reading more about them. Just wanted to mention that. That's what I do here. I tell you all the news stories, and you look at the ones that you want to look more into, that you're interested in, and you're always in the know. The teaser trailer for the upcoming Avatar sequel is finally here, and I'm here for it. I don't care what you people think. I love the Avatar movie. I love the original, and I can't wait to see the sequel. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. All right, I feel like this is too much, a little too news dumpy. Let's do the audio montage, get you some audio clips, and then I'll just read you the rest of the headlines in the official news dump. But let's start today with the nasally tone of the Senate Majority Leader for a little while longer, at least, Chuck Schumer, who said the Senate will vote Wednesday on legislation to codify broad abortion rights protections. It's not going to pass, according to pretty much everybody. But here he is yesterday on the Senate floor.
So tonight I will set up a vote for Wednesday on legislation that will codify the fundamental right to an abortion into federal law. Every American is going to see where every senator stands on protecting one of the most important rights a woman has regarding her own body. I want to be clear. This week's vote is not an abstract exercise. This is as real and as high stakes as it gets. And Senate Republicans will no longer be able to hide from the horror they've unleashed upon women in America. After spending years packing our courts with right-wing judges and justices, after changing the rules of the Senate to push 3 rigidly conservative justices, after stealing the nomination of Merrick Garland, the time has come for Republicans, this new MAGA Republican Party, to answer for their actions. If Senate Republicans allow the Supreme Court's decision to stand, it will be open season on women's rights in America.
Well said by Chuck Schumer, and I want to play another little clip from him on the Senate floor yesterday.
The game here is not about states' rights. The goal has always been a national ban on abortions altogether. States' rights is a smokescreen, nothing more than a distraction, a ruse to hide from the true claims of the hard right of the MAGA Republicans, a national ban on abortion.
Okay, there you go. That's Chuck Schumer yesterday on the Senate floor. Here is the White House Press Secretary, Jen Psaki, who said yesterday that the U.S. is at serious risk of having a nationwide ban on abortion. Ooh, dear.
Thank you. On abortion, Republican leader Mitch McConnell has said that a national ban on abortion could be possible, depending on the votes. Without court intervention, just how at risk does the administration believe the U.S. is to completely outlaw abortion?
I think we're at serious risk. You noted Mitch McConnell and other Republicans in Congress are talking about a national ban on a woman's right to choose. There were a number, I think it was something, I can get the exact number here, but dozens and dozens of Republicans in Congress signed on to the Mississippi court case and advocating for severe restrictions on a woman's right to choose and a woman's right to make choices about her own body. And we've seen in other places in the country. Just yesterday, the governor of Mississippi said directly whether that. Just yesterday, the governor said directly whether they wouldn't say whether they would directly go after the right to use contraception, meaning that's another area where, so as the president has said over the course of the last nearly week, his concern is about, yes, a woman's right to make choices about her own health care, about what this final opinion could be. It's also about what choices could be made that go beyond that. I'd also note that Louisiana legislators advanced a bill to classify abortion as homicide, which would allow women who terminate their pregnancies to be charged with murder and potentially criminalize in vitro fertilization and forms of birth control. So in some ways, yes, you're seeing an outcry by the nearly 2/3 of the public, many of them peacefully protesting, who are concerned about what this opinion will say. But you're also seeing a number of Republicans in states and some in Congress double down on this potential to overturn a law that has been the law of the land for 50 years.
Here is a response to this from one of the most unlikable and disliked people in all the world. This is Senator Ted Cruz arguing that Roe v. Wade being overturned won't be that bad.
The kind of angry leftists, many of whom are pretty ignorant and don't even know what overturning Roe means, I think a month afterwards are going to be surprised, wait, nothing about my life changed. In other parts of the country that are not bright blue, in redder states, in states like Tennessee, states like Texas, you're going to see some meaningful restrictions on abortion. And it's going to vary state by state how extensive those restrictions are. That was the framers' view in the Constitution, is to let the rules in each state reflect the values of the citizens of those states. But in the redder states, there are fewer people that are going to be horrified by that.
Okay, well, how about that? Well, you know, if you want a place to go, apparently to get an abortion, Chicago will be a safe haven. Here is the Chicago mayor, Lori Lightfoot, on MSNBC yesterday saying that Chicago will be a safe haven for abortion should Roe v. Wade actually be overturned by the Supreme Court. She announced her Justice for All pledge, including $500,000 in funds to help provide abortion access. She's a Democrat, and here she is on MSNBC with Hallie Jackson yesterday.
So let's talk about this new announcement. Again, setting aside basically $500,000 to provide access to abortions for women in neighboring states if those states were to ban abortion. You called it a call to arms in making this announcement. Explain that.
Well, I think everybody who saw that draft opinion has gone through a range of different emotions. But we can't just be angry. We've got to be intentional. We've got to be dedicated. And that's why I'm calling upon fellow elected officials across the country, and particularly my fellow mayors, to join me in making the pledge that we made today, which is a Justice for All pledge. And fundamentally, it reaffirms Chicago as a welcoming city, a city that doesn't discriminate, and a city that's going to stand with women. So we think that this 5-point pledge is critically important for us to rally around in this fight, not only to save women's, but if you look at that draft opinion and you look at the appellants' briefs and the amici in support of the appellants, they're going after every right that has been recognized that arises from a right of privacy. Whether it's a right to contraception, the right for same-sex marriage, interracial marriage. I even saw some idiocy over the weekend where folks were arguing that they should go next after Brown versus the Board of Education. I hope these folks overplay their hand, but we can't sleep through this, which is why it's an important call to action.
All right, that's the Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot on what they are going to do as a result of the Supreme Court's decision. Now let's go over to an interesting clip from actor, talk show host, author. I interviewed her and really liked her. Her name is Busy Phillips. She discussed her own experience with abortion care amid threats to Roe v. Wade, and I thought this was an interesting minute or so.
Joy, I had the opportunity to speak before Congress in 2019 about the abortion that I had in Arizona, my home state, when I was 15 years old. Arizona is one of the states that possibly could completely overturn Roe and make abortion impossible to get for women in that state. I think it's unconscionable. I know that's a word that people have been throwing around, but just to give some context for the people that watch your show, 1 in 4 women will have an abortion before they exit their childbearing years. I'm one of those people. You know someone and you love someone who has had an abortion. There's no good reason or bad reason for having an abortion. There's only the abortion care that you need. That's Liz Winstead, who's an incredible activist, says that repeatedly, and it's true. We need to stop qualifying experiences of women and understand that what happens in our bodies is up to us and our doctors and our God, not yours.
There you go. Busy Phillips on The View yesterday with a shout out to Liz Winstead. All right. Well, that's all the sound clips I've got pertaining to abortion. But I do think this is interesting, staying on the issue of women's issues. Alicia Keys was on the radio yesterday, and I saw this clip about her musician. You know, everybody knows Alicia Keys, right? About her, she opens up about the unfair pressure that media place on women to look a certain way. And I thought this was interesting.
My sons, they love anime. They're watching Hunter x Hunter. They're watching One Piece. They're watching all these things. And the women, as we know, anime loves a voluptuous woman, which I do too, by the way. I love a very curvy, beautiful woman. There's nothing to be ashamed of or anything. And yet there's a conversation that we have to have about what beauty is. Like, a woman is not just how large her breasts are. A woman is not just how skinny her waist is. A woman is not just how big her ass is. Although that is beautiful in so many ways and we can respect a woman's body, that's not all a woman should be kind of boiled down to. No. And a lot of times the imagery that we're seeing is showing us if we're not looking like that in these proportions, somehow we're not beautiful. Or if we're not super thin, if we're seeing a bunch of magazines and we're seeing like what, model most, at least in the past, now it's definitely diversifying, I feel more, but there's still so much to go. If we're not a certain skinniness or whatever, that we're not beautiful. So it gets confusing because you see all these images from when you're a kid, right, and then you start to feel like that's how you're supposed to present, or else somehow you're not beautiful. So that's like this learned behavior we were talking about that we have to break. We have to realize, no, that's someone else's rules they put on us, standards they put on us that we are actually allowed to break.
Yeah, brilliantly said by Alicia Keys. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And of course, well, we've heard lots of people say that over the years. And it's, I think, an important message I agree with. And I thought it always is worth updating and hearing influential people, in this case, women, talking about it. So well said. All right, let's go to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and take a listen to the UN ambassador to the U.S. Her name is Linda Thomas Greenfield, as Russia celebrates World War II's Victory Day.
President Putin has recognized he has no victory to celebrate. His efforts in Ukraine have not succeeded. He was not able to go into Ukraine and bring them to their knees in a few days and have them surrender. He gave up on taking Kyiv, and he has moved to reassess his positioning in Ukraine.
There you go. That's Linda Thomas Greenfield poking the bear, if you will. All right, now here is a disgraced former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. He was on Fox News on Monday, and he said he believes former President Donald Trump, also disgraced, was a threat to democracy. He's out there trying to sell his new book, which you shouldn't buy, yet this is still interesting, even though he waited to say it to sell a book.
You say in page 1, can't you just shoot them? Just shoot them in the legs or something, saying the president had asked you for the U.S. military to shoot Americans in the streets of the nation's capital. And you said it was surreal.
Right.
Here's what you said in your confirmation hearing.
You know, my time in the Army, I grew up with this view that if you're asked to do anything that is illegal or immoral or unethical, then that would be the point at which you have to consider resignation.
And you'd be willing to do that?
Absolutely.
Are there points in this book where you clearly write that you had crossed that Rubicon, and yet you don't resign?
No, I never crossed that Rubicon. I said I would never do anything illegal, immoral, or unethical.
But you suggested you were being asked to.
It was being suggested by the president, and we successfully pushed back on that. We being Attorney General Barr, General Milley, myself, and walking back from that notion.
General Mattis had problems too. He resigned. Others have resigned. You felt it was better for you to be in place and save this criticism for this book.
I thought my duty was to the country, and it is and remains. And I thought it was better staying in the job and trying to shape policy to prevent bad things and advance good things for the nation rather than just resigning. Look, I could have resigned on the spot. It would have saved me a lot of grief, a lot of headache. But I thought that would be putting myself before the country, not the other way around.
Do you think Donald Trump was a threat to democracy?
I think that given the events of January 6th, given how he has undermined the election results, he incited people to come to D.C., stirred them up that morning, and failed to call them off. To me, that threatens our democracy.
So, yes.
I think the answer would, what else can you conclude, Brett?
What else can you conclude but that the former president was a threat to democracy, according to so many of his own cabinet secretaries, and including his former Secretary of Defense there, Mark Esper, whose book, again, you should not buy. And let's give the last word to the host of The Last Word on MSNBC. It's Lawrence O'Donnell, who last night ripped the U.S. Constitution for allowing former President Donald Trump the opportunity to appoint 3 justices to the Supreme Court.
Trump is obviously, by a gigantic order of magnitude, the stupidest man who has ever won the Electoral College. And in the presidency, stupidity is dangerous. And thanks to the corruption of the Constitution, which has turned out to be a much weaker document than we thought, Mitch McConnell refused to follow the constitutional requirement of the Senate giving the President of the United States advice and consent on President Obama's last Supreme Court nominee. By refusing to even vote on President Obama's nominee to the Supreme Court, Mitch McConnell set up the stupidest president in history to appoint 1/3 of the Supreme Court using a list of possible nominees given to him by Mitch McConnell. That is corrupting the Constitution. And now that constitutionally corrupted Supreme Court is working on a draft opinion in which 5 Supreme Court justices, only one of whom was appointed by a Republican president who actually got the most votes in the presidential election, will, for the first time in the country's history, revoke a constitutional right. The constitutional right for women and girls and children who get pregnant to decide what happens next inside their own bodies.
All right, well, that'll be the last sound clip from The Last Word, Lawrence O'Donnell, last night on MSNBC. And now it's time to get to the rest of those headlines, and we've got a great news dump jingle. Now, the story was submitted from our friend RJ in Las Vegas. Hey, RJ, longtime listener. Great to have you contributing an idea for the news dump jingle story. And this is a story about a California couple who returned home to find their house filled with birds. Pete Coe, take it away.
Swallows flapping round the room, owners feeling stuck. They've got some cleaning to do on today's news dump.
Yeah, there you go. Is that a swallow chirping? Really? They got some cleaning to do is right. Imagine that. It'd be really weird to walk in your home and just see an aviary inside and shit everywhere. Well, I got some cleaning done on Monday, by the way. Speaking of my own news dump, I started sanding the deck. I rented a sander, and it didn't really do a great job, and it was super annoying. And I'll put it in a fail category, but screw it. I'm just going to paint that deck, regardless because it's not in the greatest shape, and I'm just trying to save it for as long as I can. That is my news dump update. That's what I got done on Monday. What will Tuesday hold? Who knows? Let's get to news stories that actually you care about and affect you. This is interesting. Andy Warhol's iconic Marilyn Monroe portrait sold for $195 million, the record sale for an American artwork auction, signaling the strong start to New York's major spring auctions. Who the hell has $195 million for a painting? That is obscene. That is obscene. That would change millions and millions of children's lives, and yet somebody just dumped it on a painting? I don't care who did it, or that's actually disgusting in my opinion. Sorry. More than 580,000 pounds of frozen chicken breast have been recalled. Wayne Farms LLC recalling the ready-to-eat frozen chicken breast fillets, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Apparently, the chicken breast fillet products might have been undercooked. So look into that if you've got that kind of chicken. Yesterday, the Senate passed a bill to protect Supreme Court justices' families. The move following protests in the wake of a leaked abortion ruling draft. You may have heard about a lot of controversy on that. I haven't really decided to cover that one. COVID positivity rates in parts of New York are back over 20% as the fifth wave of the pandemic spreads throughout the state, driven by highly contagious new subvariant. So looks like maybe this fifth wave is my turn, because New York is where I go at least once a week to work. On Last Week Tonight on HBO, and I'll be there this weekend with JL doing stand-up, JL Covan Saturday night. So yikes, it's coming for me. The Biden administration, this was big news yesterday, Biden administration capping the cost of internet for low-income Americans. 20 internet providers, including AT&T, Comcast, Verizon, have agreed to provide high-speed service at steep discount to low-income consumers. This was announced Monday, significantly expanding broadband access for millions of Americans. Lots more to learn and talk about that. I'll be talking with Christine Romans on, I guess it'll be on the Thursday show, and lots to talk about with her, including the tech stocks continuing to tumble. Dow tumbling again. S&P hitting a 52-week low. But speaking of economics, I thought this was an interesting story as well. There's a pretty interesting and strong economic theory that one of the causes for price hikes and inflation is that there aren't enough immigrants here to do the type of labor that they often do. The headline at the Associated Press: less immigrant labor in U.S. contributing to price hikes. How about that? I know I mentioned Victory Day in Russia, but I didn't mention that the Russian ambassador to Poland was pelted almost perfectly with red paint. That's a lot of P's. At the VE Day gathering. If you haven't seen that video, you got to see the red paint get thrown at this guy's face. And I don't know how you feel about that protest either. But all right. And finally, on today's news dump, 2 former police officers in Lawton, Oklahoma City, have been charged with first-degree manslaughter in the shooting death of a black man in December while responding to a 911 call of an alleged protective order violation. Officers Robert Hinkle and Nathan Ronan were charged in the death of Quadri Sanders. The charges follow a months-long probe by the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, which included graphic video of the deadly incident. They were fired from the police department back in January, and now they've been charged with first-degree manslaughter. Some justice? Question mark. All right, that's all I've got for today's news dump. Brought to you by the paid subscribers of Stand Up. If you aren't one, sign up now. StandUpWithPete.com. StandUpWithPete.com. Let's go on to the interview portion of the show, the best portion of the show. My favorite part to do of the show is talking to the super smart guests that I'm able to get booked on the show, and I think that's also the value of it. Not many people can get these guests, these types of guests, for as long form as I can, as often as I can, and that's really a huge value that you get with your subscription here to Stand Up. All right. Well, I always love to talk with Jonathan Alter. He's been a friend of mine for a long time and a mentor of sorts. Of course, he's an award-winning author, political analyst, documentary filmmaker, columnist, television producer, radio host at Sirius XM now. His most recent book is about Jimmy Carter. It's a biography. It's received amazing reviews. It's called His Very Best, Jimmy Carter, A Life. He also wrote 2 books about President Obama, The Center Holds and The Promise. And in 2006, he wrote The Defining Moment, FDR's 100 Days and the Triumph of Hope. It's a very important book. He's a former senior editor and columnist at Newsweek, longtime political analyst at NBC and MSNBC. His new Substack newsletter he launched last year, it's called Old Goats Ruminating with Friends, includes frequent columns in his conversations with accomplished people of wisdom and experience. Of course, I mentioned Alter Family Politics. You can hear that on Sirius XM. He hosts that with his 3 adult children. He is on Twitter at Jonathan Alter, and he is here now to talk to me about his long perspective on women's rights because, you know, you're like, oh, you're asking a man about women's rights. His mom was a very important person in Chicago politics, Joanne Alter. He's got 2 amazing daughters and a brilliant and amazing wife who is a former executive producer at the Colbert Report and the CBS Late Show. And I just love Jonathan. I talked with him about the abortion issue and so much more. Very happy to have him back. JonathanAlter.com, at Jonathan Alter. Here we go. Good to see you. Thank you for joining me. I know you're spending time with your granddaughter, who I want to talk about.
Okay. Well, I'm always happy to talk about Rosie, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I was just thinking about your mom and about you and about your daughters and now about your granddaughter. And I wanted to get your perspective on what you've seen in your life, in your mother's life even, and what was advocated for when it comes to women's rights, reproductive rights, gender equity, because I know that your mom was a big deal.
It's really interesting that you're asking me about this right now, Pete, because 2 days ago on Saturday, I went to Chicago for the annual Joanne Alter Women in Politics and Government lecture at the Chicago Humanities Festival, which is Chicago Humanities Festival is a wonderful mostly literary festival in Chicago. And this year's speaker was Anita Hill for the Joanne Alter lecture. And, you know, we've had Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren and Claire McCaskill and Amy Klobuchar and a bunch of other women have come in for this lecture in my mother's memory. But Anita Hill, who drew a big crowd, she did this really interesting thing where even though she didn't know my mother, she had read up on her and how my mother confronted the late Mayor Daley of Chicago about the absence of women in Illinois and Chicago politics. And my mother became the first woman elected to public office in Cook County, the first Democrat.
She pointed out that on a ballot of 32 candidates, there were no women's names, spurring Mayor Daley to invite her to run. She became the first woman to win countywide election, winning 1 million votes as the elected commissioner of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District and breaking the glass ceiling for women in Chicago politics. Just a little bit about Joanne Alter. That's one reason why I wanted to ask you on, but I have also met your daughters. Yeah. I know you have a granddaughter. So back to that perspective.
So it was just really interesting because your question serendipitously connected to the fact that Judge Mikva, Abner Mikva's daughter, who is on the bench in Illinois, and she introduced Anita Hill, and she made this connection between, you know, my mother kind of speaking truth to male power in 1972 when she confronted this, you know, very, very autocratic boss, Mayor Daley Sr., and what Anita Hill did with the all-white members of this, all-male members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Anita Hill sort of picked up on this connection between my mother and herself, which seems a little bit far-fetched when you just think about it. But she started to explain, like, that at that time in the Senate, this is just 30 years ago, when, you know, she had the famous confrontation, if you were one of the only 2 women senators, or if you were a female staffer, you had to go to a different floor to go to the bathroom. That's how set up it was for men. And, my mother, she once had another commissioner say to her face, "Joanne, you're one of those brainless, brawless broads who is wrecking this country." Right to her face.
Good alliteration.
It was good alliteration. Yeah. Yeah.
He must have thought about his insult before he walked up to your mom.
Yes. I don't know. I mean, most of these guys were dumber than a tree stump, these machine hacks that she had to deal with. But, and then our daughter, we have 2 daughters, and they are both, doing well in their chosen careers. We have a son also, and Charlotte.
We don't talk about Tommy.
You know all about Tommy and but Charlotte's, a journalist, and Molly is in venture capital, and they're like living in the world that their grandmother wanted to make possible. So when we look at Charlotte's daughter, who's 5 months old now, and we think, what will her life be like? And it seems like it will have limitless possibilities. But then when you take a look at Anita Hill's new book, and she talks about all of these struggles that women have and the huge amount of sexual harassment and intimidation that remains in the culture and violence against women, and you realize that it's a little bit like progress on race, that it's, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 1 step back, 2 steps, 1 step. And it is not a straight line. And you do remember that, Martin Luther King line that Barack Obama liked to quote, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, which should give people hope that even when there are these setbacks, that eventually we can make real progress.
I just thought of you because also I keep hearing people make this point that our daughters today, or girls born today, my daughters who are 14 and 17, coming of age, they will have less rights than our mothers did, or even than the rights that your mother helped win. And I just can't stop thinking about that. And because of what you've seen, I thought that would give you, such an interesting perspective. So what do we do now? Because everybody's talking about voting and politics, but I hear from a lot of activists who say, listen, we're not going to be able to get anything done. Gerrymandering, the courts, we need to basically create safe haven for women who want reproductive rights, at least in the blue states, and try to hold the blue state women's rights. What do you think of that?
Well, you have to do both. I mean, I think that you kind of have to take the long view. And my mother was first elected to public office the year before Roe, but the big struggle of her lifetime nationally was for the Equal Rights Amendment. And they failed. They came very close. They failed. And that was a real bitter experience for her. And it was an example of how there have been setbacks. Now, that was arguably not as destructive to the lives of women as this Supreme Court decision is, or will be if it goes through as anticipated. But the thing is, I think it's important to understand that if you think you can't compete because the system is rigged, you've already lost. And that's a really defeatist attitude. And it's also inconsistent with the history of political change. So, I mean, compare it to, as Heather Cox Richardson, the brilliant historian, has done, compare it to the lack of democracy in the Jim Crow South between 1880 and 1965 when the Voting Rights Act passed. And in that, very long period of time, 85 years, basically there was no democracy in the South. Blacks went from being able to vote during Reconstruction, and suddenly, there were counties in Alabama, Georgia, and other southern states where there were literally no Black registered voters. And imagine how the politics would have been different, if blacks had had the vote all those years. So did they give up and go, oh, the system is rigged against us, we can't compete politically? No, they started, to organize the civil rights movement. And then when they got the vote, then they started to organize politically in more conventional terms. And so I guess I really object to this idea that, we can't beat these people. They are more experienced because I'm talking they being the anti-abortion folks, because they've been laboring in these state legislatures for all this time. And liberals and pro-choice people, and by the way, I think they need to reframe the pro-choice argument because I think it's tired as a framing device, but they have been reliant on Roe versus Wade. So they haven't felt the urgency, the political urgency to fight it out in the state capitals. So the burden is really now on women and men who believe in reproductive freedom to have a new birth of freedom, a new birth of energy, and organize and push back hard and push the anti-abortion forces on the defensive. See, this is what has now changed. They were never on the defensive before because Roe was backstopping everybody, and it was the lack of protection from our legal system was an abstraction. If Roe is repealed, it was conditional. It was not real.
Right.
Now it's a slap in the face. Now it's real. And so the political question in the next 20 years is going to be, will people who have what I consider to be the right, the freedom-loving position on this, to keep the government out of our bedrooms, to keep the government out of women's lives, will they organize? And so that's on them, on us. It's on us at this point, not to look for a court to come in and save our ass.
Right.
We have to save our own asses. And by the way, if people go, oh, we can't do this, every movement, as Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, explained and others have amplified, every social movement that has changed this country and that is always ahead of the politics has started with a half a dozen people sitting around in a room. And once you get organized and you figure out what the right messaging is, you can move mountains.
And you mentioned messaging and that comment you made about a fresher message than pro-choice in a tweet you wrote. It's time to de-emphasize, quote, choice in favor of a fresher message. Anti-forced birth is good, as is pro-care for women, which worked in Catholic Mexico, and then asked your Twitter followers to send other newly framed messages. So what do you think is going to work? By the way, it's so interesting about Mexico recently affording women the right to an abortion, and we're walking it back. Wild.
It is. It's amazing. There are other almost entirely Catholic countries that have much more
Ireland
permissive systems. So I don't know what the right message is going to be. I think it needs to be kind of crowdsourced and then to find out what's resonating. And that's what polling does. But I do feel that choice is not getting it done. And
right.
that, every advertising campaign, every political messaging campaign needs to be freshened up from time to time. And this one just doesn't seem to be working as well as it should, even though most of the country is pro-choice. So, but it's not enough in the same way it's not enough for Hillary Clinton to have gotten a lot more votes than Donald Trump. It's not enough to have majority support in the polls because that doesn't speak to the question of how effective one's lobbyists are, how effective one is in getting involved in state and local races. There was a wonderful op-ed piece in the New York Times on Sunday by this woman and her campaign manager who had run and won in rural Maine a race for the state legislature. And she was just explaining that Democrats have given up in rural areas. So why are there all these anti-abortion state legislators? In a lot of cases, because it's been unilateral disarmament by Democrats. They're not going out and talking to the people in rural areas. They're just talking to other people in Brooklyn and the Upper West Side and wherever they happen to live. And they're not, organizing. And that it's ultimately, it all comes down to that. And we do have, our democracy has taken some serious hits. There's no getting around it.
You're talking about
we still have an opportunity to organize and win elections.
You're talking about the essay in the New York Times titled "What Democrats Don't Understand About Rural America," and it's by Chloe Maximum Canyon Woodward. She's the woman who was the youngest woman to become a state senator in Maine's history. But the other woman was the campaign manager. You mentioned. Well, I just want to ask you if you think that Republicans have gone too far. How far has the Overton window on abortion moved? Because not too long ago, a Republican running in a primary, Senate primary, I forget his name, Murdoch maybe, he said something about supporting rape, even not allowing for exceptions for rape and incest. And it sank him in a primary, I think, in Indiana. Now you hear the governor of Mississippi answering this on Meet the Press yesterday, like not even in no exceptions for rape or incest in America in 2022, Jonathan. Have they gone too far?
I think they have. I think we're going to find that that's a very unpopular position. But what you have to have is people, and they might not defeat him in Mississippi, but they can certainly turn the tables on the Republicans and put them on the defensive and say, if you're 14, say to the governor, the question on Meet the Press should have been, Governor, if you're if you had a 14-year-old daughter, I don't know, maybe if he find out if he does have daughters and say, if your daughter was 14 and she was raped, are you saying that you would feel that she had to go to term with that pregnancy? And if he said yes, there are a lot of people who would take issue with that. And I'm not so sure he would say yes, by the way.
Yeah.
Because I think these have not been, when you're living in a Roe versus Wade world where that's the law of the land, these kinds of intense questions, they're abstractions, as I said. They don't really have the immediacy that they will now. And so I think the politics of this are going to get very difficult for the Republicans over time. That doesn't mean that, all these red states are going to suddenly allow abortions. It's going to be a long fight state by state. But I think we're going to look back pretty soon, maybe as soon as this fall, and say that this was a political loser for Republicans.
What about, you mentioned organizing, you mentioned not giving up, you mentioned obviously Congress and passing different laws and getting things done at the ballot box, but you're still, all those suggestions are about the legislative branch. And what I just keep coming back to is even if we could win without being gerrymandered, without voter suppression, you still have to answer to these ideologues on the Supreme Court in the end on everything. And so what do you do about that? Am I right to be kind of focused on it's always going to end up at the Supreme Court? Should we pack the court? What if anything can be done about the justices on the Supreme Court who get their arguments from Sean Hannity?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't call it packing the Supreme Court because that has a bad odor going back to when Franklin Roosevelt tried and failed to do it with an overwhelming Democratic Congress. So it maybe reform the Supreme Court, which would include a series of reforms that might include expansion, but would also include some sort of retirement age where they went on senior status. And that would have to be tested constitutionally. And obviously the existing court, since they would be self-interested, would not allow it for current justices, but they might rule it constitutional for future justices where they can't be, they serve under the Constitution, they serve for terms on good behavior. It doesn't say for life.
Right.
It says on good behavior. And so they can't be pushed out for anything except bad behavior. But it doesn't say that they have the right to the Supreme Court seat on good behavior. So if you look at appellate judges, for instance, when they reach a certain age, they go on senior status. So they're still on the bench, but they hear many fewer cases and different kinds of cases. So you could say that you could pass a law that said that any Supreme Court justice past age 80 would only hear lower court cases and would no longer be on the Supreme Court. There's a number of different reform proposals, and Biden actually has a commission that is studying those proposals. What I actually think Biden should do is that he should next year, he should say, I'm old. And when you get older, even if you still have all your marbles, as I do, you slow down and we need new leadership. I'm not going to run for re-election. And by the same token, I think that people my age should not be on the Supreme Court. If they shouldn't be in the presidency, they shouldn't be on the Supreme Court either. So I'm introducing legislation to put in senior status for Supreme Court justices. And while I'm at it, I'm going to expand the court to 13 members. Now, this would be, obviously, the Republicans would go crazy over this, and it would raise a huge shitstorm, but he wouldn't be running for re-election. So who are they going to take it out on, right? And then the Democrats should ram through 4 new justices as quickly as possible before, this is assuming they hold the Senate.
Right.
But I think they will hold the Senate, actually. I take a little bit of a different view.
Oh, interesting.
The way I analyze the races. Just in answer to your, sorry to ramble on here, but in answer to your basic question, not all of these legislative issues will be overturned in the Supreme Court. They've been gunning for Roe for basically their whole lives, some of these younger justices. And so it's not like every liberal piece of legislation is going to be overturned. I mean, it's true that they almost overturned Obamacare. And if the court's composition was what it is today, they would have overturned Obamacare. Right. And it was only Roberts' change that made it 5-4. But, there's a lot else that will withstand scrutiny. But there's also some bad things that are going to happen. I don't happen to believe that, as bad as they are, that they're going to reverse gay marriage or loving the decision that legalized interracial marriage, which was illegal in Virginia and other states. So I don't, it's enough that they're turning back the clock on abortion. I think some of the rest of this is, fine to make as a kind of a political argument to mobilize people, but I'm not genuinely that
I don't know.
I
think Senator Marsha Blackburn, who seems like a stable genius, she proposed some kind of ban on contraception until you're married, Jonathan, that sounds like a fun world to be in.
Well, that was, the Griswold case, which, the Supreme Court case, which legalized contraception, or basically
decriminalized
Griswold versus Connecticut. It decriminalized contraception, Griswold versus Connecticut. And that was a case involving a married couple. Let Blackburn go down that road. Then what needs to happen that's not happening is for the Tennessee Democratic Party to grow a pair and put ads up right now that do brand damage to Republicans and Marsha Blackburn in particular in Tennessee. My concern, Pete, is that, one of our political parties is completely off the rails and has turned into a white grievance party of liars and Putinists. And our other political party has turned into a bunch of political pansies who don't realize it's a contact sport. And if somebody says something like that is hugely unpopular in the state of Tennessee, I promise you that Marsha Blackburn's statement on banning contraception except for married couples, it's just a huge political miscalculation on her part. But there's nobody there to exploit it. There's nobody home in the Democratic Party of Tennessee, that I know of, or certainly that knows how to break through and hit her with a 2x4. And this is what's not happening. I shouldn't say hit her with a 2x4 because I don't believe in violence against women. I'm speaking metaphorically, violence against anybody. I'm speaking metaphorically. Politics is a contact sport. The Democrats don't get it.
I'm going to edit out your correction.
Okay.
And I'm going to edit in you saying something even more violent, but it won't sound like it's you. It'd be like just words pasted together. No, I hear what you're saying about Tennessee and having to react to those outrageous statements. What about, let me ask you two more questions, big picture issues, obviously. You know, you've obviously been following what's happening in Ukraine, Putin's invasion of Ukraine and everything around it. So my question is just your reaction to it. 75 days in, I don't want to ask you a specific question. I just want to know what your thoughts are, you know, from the American political point of view, much less a foreign policy or geopolitics, world order point of view. Who are you following? What are your thoughts on what's happened there?
Well, for all of the destruction and the tragedy and the utter misery of the Ukrainian people and the destroyed lives, which should all be uppermost in our mind. But having said that, I am so much more optimistic about the future of Europe and the future of the world than I was on February 24th.
Wow. Great.
Because the West has stood up and the Ukrainians have proven heroic and Putin's not going to win. And if Putin had won, we would have been back into a might makes right world. And that would have likely ended in conflagration, in world war. And so this is like if the West had stopped Hitler when he moved into Czechoslovakia, or stopped Hitler when he remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936. And you know, we stopped him and we've sent a strong message. Now, the war is going to go on for a long time and more people are going to be killed, but they're not going to win. And the West has made that very clear. And we collectively, the West has stood up and we have superior military power. We're superior on every level except nuclear, which is a worry, but I'm not actually as afraid of Putin using nuclear weapons as some other people are. And I think he's got a bloody nose and he's looking for a way out, and we don't know what that will be. It's very, very interesting that the retreating Russian forces burned the bridges behind them in the last couple of days. As they were leaving eastern Ukraine. Now, on one level, that's bad for Ukraine because it means, you know, they have less infrastructure and they can't chase them back over the border. But it also means it's going to be pretty hard for, you know, Russian troops to move back in. What bridges are they going to use in that part of eastern Ukraine? Now, that doesn't mean the war's over, but it's the events on the ground have been very, very inspiring. The leadership from Zelensky has been inspiring. In terms of American politics, I just go back to what we were just talking about. I think the Democrats are completely failing to exploit this Putinist wing of the Republican Party. And, you know, and they assume that, see, Republicans don't assume that American voters are dumb and can't absorb a foreign policy message. They've used foreign policy in their campaigns many times.
Right.
Democrats, they think, oh, we can only run on the economy. You know, somebody should be in Ohio right now, maybe an independent committee, just slamming J.D. Vance for saying he doesn't care who wins in Ukraine.
Right. Yeah.
I know a guy who comes out of the Trump administration, very conservative guy, who will not vote for J.D. Vance and is trying to organize opposition to J.D. Vance and Rand Paul on the issue of Ukraine. He's a Republican. Why should that all be on Republicans? Where are the Democrats doing that? And where are the Democrats, by the way, and where's the press in reminding the American people that even now Donald Trump has not uttered a single word, not a single word, out of the millions of words that come out of his fucking mouth critical of Vladimir Putin. Not a single word, even now. He said, oh, maybe Putin has changed. That's the furthest he's gone. That's all you can do? And you want to be president again? But who's going to tell the people this? Oh, we're sick of Trump. We don't want to hear about Trump. Well, you need to be reminded that he's pro-Putin, and that's not a good look right now. He might have been able to get away with that before Ukraine, but not now.
I don't ask everybody this question, but everybody does have an answer. But you're one of the people who I would want to know the answer to this question. And a lot of people certainly are wondering. I realize that it's regional and it's different for different demographics. But the question, of course, is how much of a hold does Donald Trump still have on today's Republican Party? If we're even calling it the Republican Party, I don't even know what it should be referred to. But how much influence does he have over a certain segment of American voters?
A lot. I mean, look at Ohio. J.D. Vance was way behind, and Trump endorsed him, and he won easily. So he still has a lot of sway in what I think Biden is rightly now calling the extremist MAGA Republican Party. They don't want to just attack the Republican Party because they want some of their voters, and they don't want to make them feel bad that in the past they've been Republicans. So they've just in the last couple of days, just reading about this morning, they have, in the White House, they've settled on the phrase MAGA Republicans. And they're going to try to make the midterms a choice between Democrats and MAGA Republicans, extremist MAGA Republicans. That word extremist needs to be attached every time you refer to one of these people. Partly just out of simple accuracy. They are, by any standard, extremist politicians. And so, but I also think it's helpful politically. The key to limiting the losses in the midterms, it's a long shot in the House, doable, conceivable. It's much more possible to hold the Senate. But the key to limiting losses this fall is to turn the election from being a referendum on the president, which midterms usually are, into being a choice between, Democrats who share your values, and polls show that they do, and extremist MAGA Republicans. And I think they found that because Trump himself is not on the ballot and is not president, that it makes sense to not use Trump's name in all of their attacks, to broaden it, to explain to people that this cancer is now metastasized to much of the Republican Party, and to give these extremists the keys to the car, to give people who think that January 6th was no big deal the keys to the car, to give Putinists the keys to the car is not in their interest. And people have to be convinced of that. It's going to be a challenge. I don't think the Democrats have been doing a good job so far, but there's still time left.
What do you think of the public hearings coming up on January 6th insurrection? Do you think that will move the needle? Do you think it's important?
I think it's very important for a couple of reasons. One is you need to keep the anger of Democrats boiling. So to retell the story, which Jamie Raskin, Benny Thompson and company, and Liz Cheney will do very well. We saw, they've had one public hearing. They had one at the very beginning with 3 Capitol police officers. It was a very moving and impactful hearing. So if they do that in prime time for weeks, which they're planning to do, they will be pretty choreographed. They're not going to have people up there wasting our time. And they're going to be very dramatic. And you're going to hear about this president who sat on his hands while the Capitol of the United States was being attacked. And then he tweets an anti-Mike Pence tweet when they have a noose of Pence up on the mall, and that's been reported, and he's seen it on television. And he's still tweeting against Mike Pence. And the insanity of it, the just unbelievable dereliction of duty, it's a story. It's like all important stories. It has to be told and retold. And I think they'll tell it very well, and I think it will move the needle. Will it save the Democratic House? Probably not, but it might limit the losses. And by the way, it's extremely important to limit the losses.
Yeah.
To not go, oh, well, my guy can't win, forget it. I'm not going to get involved this year because the Democrats are going to lose. In terms of getting the House back in 2024, if the Democrats nominate a strong candidate and win the 2024 election, a lot of that depends on how deep of a hole they're in. There's a big difference between losing, 10 seats and losing 50 seats. And there are midterms when we've lost more than 50. By we, I mean the only pro-small d Democratic party in the United States, which is the big D Democrats. So when I say we, I speak for all people who love democracy.
Right. Yeah.
We have one of our political parties that is hostile. It's an authoritarian party. And Bill Kristol, by the way, Bill Kristol, Dan Quayle's chief of staff, the ideological guru for the Republican Party for 30 years, he said the race in Ohio this fall is between Tim Ryan, D for Democrat, and J.D. Vance, A for authoritarian.
Wow. How about it?
Amazing.
Yeah. On that, I remember at Aspen Ideas Fest, where I spent a lot of time with you, sitting down, and then he sat down with his wife. I was with my wife, and I got up and left because I couldn't stand being next to Bill Kristol. And he certainly has said a lot of things, and I think even organized in the right way. It's hard to believe, but it's a great example of looking how far they are, as you said, extreme, just so far that you left Bill Kristol and a lot of other Republicans behind.
Yeah, well, this is a kind of a realignment, and I feel the same way about Liz Cheney. I mean, I couldn't stand her politics.
Yeah.
But when you think about, and I still don't want her as president, but when I think about, it reminds me of something that Pat Moynihan said once, which is, taxes go up, taxes go down. You can be for higher taxes, you can be for lower taxes. It's just not as important as the future of democracy. So you do get a sense of what's really important. And you do have to make common cause with people who you might not have otherwise wanted to in order to save our democracy. And, I know that you hear this a lot on your show, but people, they really need to understand that if Trump gets back in, it's not going to be the way it was the first time. It's lights out for our 230-year experiment.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You think he runs?
I think he does, yeah. I think he will run. I don't think he can resist. And everybody, he has such a stranglehold now on the Republican Party, on the base, that and he's putting, a lot of the pieces together. He's really learned a lot about politics, and he will also make fewer rookie mistakes than he did the first time. So I think he's going to run. I don't actually think he's going to win, but I think it's important that the Democrats nominate a younger candidate.
Jonathan Alter, always a pleasure and an honor. I really appreciate your time today. It's great catching up with you as always.
Thanks. Can I just say one more thing?
Anything.
Because I don't want people to think that I'm being critical of Biden's presidency. I think he's done a masterly job on Ukraine, made some mistakes politically, but he's basically been a good president. So my reasons for not wanting him to run again strictly relate to my sense that American elections are almost always about the future, and you want to run with a candidate who represents the future better.
Well, I appreciate your perspective on that a lot. Obviously, having written biographies, written so much about Obama and Jimmy Carter, and of course FDR, it makes that's a really important point, I think, coming from you. So, and I agree with you. And there are a lot of potential candidates out there. People say, "Oh, we don't have anybody. We don't have anybody." That's not true. Yeah, there are many, and Jimmy Carter wasn't even in the top 30
at this time before he was elected.
How about Senator Mallory McMorrow of Michigan? You see her?
Not for 2024, but certainly at some point after that. But, from her state, you could see Gretchen Whitmer as the next president.
Yeah, she seems pretty smart. Thank you so much, bud. I love talking to you, and I really appreciate it so much. You know that.
Okay, take care, Pete.
All right. Jonathan Alter, everybody. What do you think? JonathanAlter.com. Subscribe to oldgoats.substack.com. Say hello to him on Twitter at Jonathan Alter. If you buy his books, you will not be sorry. I hope you like that. Please let Jonathan know that John, who am I? I've never called him John. Jonathan, know that you heard him here on Stand Up by tweeting him, as so many of you do to many of our guests. And now it's time to get to a very special guest who comes highly recommended by a longtime listener, friend, advisor of mine, Mark Nolte, who is a real player out in Iowa City, Iowa, and Iowa in general, very well connected in political circles and business circles, economic development circles. Mark has been a longtime listener and friend of mine, and he said, you've got to interview Deirdre DeJear. She is running for governor. My next guest wants to be the governor of Iowa. You should go to DeJearforIowa.com. All the links in the show notes. I want to play for you the audio, the video. You're missing a lot of it if you don't watch the video, but I want to play for you the audio of her about a minute and a half introduction to her campaign video. I think you're going to like it. Here she is, in her own words, Deirdre DeJear. She's running for governor of Iowa.
After several weeks of doing my homework with a group of incredible community leaders throughout the state, I am signing up to do more work. I am announcing that it would be an incredible honor and give me great pleasure to be Iowa's next governor. I am of the belief that if anyone expects to lead this state, the priority must be put on Iowans. During this time a year ago, our communities were devastated. Thousands were vulnerable without power, access to food, water. Our neighbors came out to help while it took our leadership days to tap in. Leadership has to lead with the people's interest first. And I know it has been really, really challenging in spite of everything going on to see the good, to have hope. But if there is anything that I can say to each and every one of you all today, is that I believe in you. Iowa has built small businesses. It has built national education models. Iowa has built a thriving agricultural system. Iowa has built fields of opportunity. And we're not done building. We've got work to do because Iowa is worth it. I need you all to sign up. Go to DeJearforIowa.com. Tell your friends, tell your family that we've got work to do. And we're going to get it done.
Love it. There you go. Deirdre DeJear, DeJearforIowa.com. Very excited to introduce her to you for the first time on Stand Up. Hopefully the next governor of Iowa. And now my conversation with her, Deirdre DeJear. Thank you for joining me, first of all. I'm really happy to see you and have you on the show.
It's so good to be here. Even though I'm sitting down, I'm standing up.
No.
I'm excited. I'm excited about this conversation. It's going to be a joy.
It's certainly a metaphor that fits, I think, a lot of the choices that you've made in your life. And I'm excited to talk about your run. But I want to talk about you and get to know you a little bit because you come so highly recommended from longtime friend and listener Mark Nolte in Iowa, who we know and love. And let's just start with your name. It's not hard. It's not a hard name. If you look at the letters, you know how to pronounce it. It's Deirdre. But if you know a Deirdre, then that gets stuck in your brain. How am I doing about your life?
It complicates things. It complicates things. And what's so funny is that my maiden name was Howard. And so now I'm stuck with another name that's difficult for some to pronounce, Deirdre DeJear. And so, but once you get it, it's hard to forget it. Well, but it's just a matter of getting it.
With all due respect to your dad, who I know raised you and you're close with, right? Your husband's name, who you took, I guess, is what you're saying here. The alliteration and the sound, it's good for a run for governor, is all I'm saying. Deirdre DeJear. I like it. Yeah. Deirdre Howard, Deirdre DeJear. I'm voting for the latter. I'm just saying.
My husband will be happy to hear that.
When did you get married? Tell me about your husband real quick. What's so great about this guy?
I met him in Iowa, but he is originally from Oklahoma. He comes from a cattle ranching family in the state of Oklahoma, went to Iowa State, loved it so much. He got 3 degrees there, but just is an incredible individual. And I met him probably now about 16, 17 years ago, and he was one of my first clients. I was helping him. He was getting started on a construction company and needed logos and things along those lines. And so he was one of my first clients. And we then later became friends, and, the rest is history.
That's awesome. And you guys, you have dogs. You are raising, I did my prep. You are raising, at this point, let's see, you had a German Shepherd and a Golden Retriever?
Yes. A German Shepherd. She's a white German Shepherd. Beautiful. She might even pop in our conversation today because she loves to be wanted. And then I have a Golden Rot mix, which is Golden Rottweiler. He looks like the Bush Being dog. And Marvin and I adopted him our first year of marriage, just 3 months after being married. We will be married now 11 years. We got married on June 11th, 2011.
All right. Well, one relationship question. I'll put you on the spot. Best place you and Marvin, right, ever went, like a trip, a vacation. Where's your favorite? And will this get you into trouble with him if he hears it and disagrees?
It won't get me into trouble. So I've got 2 favorites. When Marvin and I were getting to know each other, we would carpool together from Iowa to Oklahoma to go visit family. He would drop me off at my parents' house, and then he would go and see his family. And that really gave us an opportunity in that 6-hour drive to get to know each other. Some of the best memories that we have ever made together were in the car, just getting to know each other, asking random questions, thinking about our different points of view. But I will say the best vacation that we've ever had was last year. We had the opportunity to go on our honeymoon after 10 years. We didn't get to go when we first got married. We got married on Saturday, and both of us had to be at work on that Monday. So 10 years later, we went to Mexico and spent about 6 days there and just did literally nothing. We walked around. I love birds. There were so many amazing exotic birds in that area, and just had a good old time.
I love it. That sounds awesome. And I'm getting to know you. I was reading, the official bio, and I read this heartbreaking detail that when you were, is it 8 years old, you lost your mom?
Yeah.
And as soon as I read that, and as soon as when you hear someone is young, at a certain age range, certainly like, I don't know what it would be, and they lose a parent, it almost just stops you in your tracks as the reader, as the person getting to know, because you say, I at least just start wondering what that means. And so what did that mean for you? What does it mean for you now, especially even I would imagine as a candidate?
Yeah. We're passing up on Mother's Day, and, Mother's Day always has a special place in my heart because of the loss of my mother. I was able to get a bonus mom and my stepmother, but I was 8. My little sister was 3 days old, and I had a little brother who was 4. My dad was 36, and literally overnight he became a widower, and it turned our lives upside down. But it did build some resilience in me. It forced me to get to know myself at a young age, which isn't very typical for young people. But I got to know myself through me, not necessarily through others. And the best thing that my dad could have done for me at that time as a young kid was connect me with a counselor and social workers to help me along this journey, because he too was struggling and couldn't necessarily pour into me when he needed someone to pour into him. And so it definitely created some resilience, but needless to say, it's parts of me that were developed during that time that are still with me. People met me where I was as a young girl, as vulnerable as that was. And now, I'm always trying to make that effort to meet people where they are, especially in their most vulnerable state, because those are the critical times where we get to grow and we get to move forward with that. And so now, rather than just think of the death of my mother, I think about now how I can honor her life by living mine and doing for others, because she was a public servant at heart, and definitely someone that the community missed when she passed.
Oh, that's wonderful. the way that you see it and have framed it for your life. You said you got to know yourself. It seems like you know yourself well, that you're very self-aware. I think you have to be, certainly when you're running for office, your strengths, your weaknesses, your personality characteristics. So who are you? Why? I guess we'll start with, your kind of entrepreneurship. You went to school for broadcasting, which is, proof you're very, you're great on the mic and on camera. I think that's obvious, of course. You've got training there. But what you ended up, though, going into business?
Yeah. So I started doing broadcast news when I was in high school. I was a sports announcer and got to run the Jumbotron behind closed doors, and then got to Drake. I was a relays reporter.
But you ran,
and I was also a politics major.
Hold on. You ran the giant screen at the stadium, at the arena?
I ran the screen. So we were fortunate enough in my high school to have a Jumbotron.
The power you had to destroy lives or your own.
Yes. Not only did I create the graphics, but I got to run my graphics during the game.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's cool. I interrupted you. I've never met a Jumbotron operator, so I just had to get. And what else did you then do there? Sorry.
So I transitioned, was really infatuated with the idea that, one, policy was an opportunity and politics was an opportunity to problem solve. I've always seen it through that lens. Now, do we always use it that way? No. But my intention as a broadcast news major was to broadcast how policy problem solves. Well, at that point in time, it was a challenge for me to become essentially a political commentator between 2004 and 2008. Now we know anybody can do that job. You just got to have a voice and an outlet to make it happen. But that's really how I started my journey framed in politics, was because we see so many challenges facing us every single day. And I just center myself around something that's really fundamental, democracy. I would not be here running for office had it not been people utilizing this tool called democracy to ensure that everybody had the access to life, liberty, and happiness. Me as a woman, me as a Black individual, me as someone who was born in the state of Mississippi. Democracy has afforded me so much. And my intention is to continuously perfect it however I can, to add value however I can, so that we make it better than it was the day before. And policy is the avenue to do that.
Well, I love that that's the case. And I want to come back to how you define life, liberty, and happiness, because as you know, there are unfortunately very different definitions of those for different people, different parts of the country. I'm sure you're having to kind of split that hair in some cases so we can unpack it. But I love the idea that policy is where you found solutions, because I've felt the same way. Often people talk about your attitude or culture or ethnicity or something else, motivation, grit, who knows? But I've always thought, no, it's really kind of maybe boring sometimes. It's policy. There has to be a framework in place to create opportunity for education, healthcare, and employment. And then people can have grit and hustle and network. But if there aren't any jobs and there's no affordable healthcare, then you're not solving any problems. You worked early on President Obama's, Senator Obama campaign in Iowa, which I used to do a joke about, which I will tell you now, my stand-up act. I said, I never thought I was in Chicago and I saw a sign that said Barack Obama. And I was like, what? For, a campaign sign. I was like, dude's name is one letter off Osama, doesn't have a chance. I remember seeing it like it was yesterday. I was on the L and I saw it. Later on, he becomes a senator, and then I see him speak in 2004, and you're like, okay, this guy's legit, amazingly, impressive guy, but I still didn't think he could win in white Iowa. And so I would say, my joke was like, how could, Barack Obama is not going to win in Iowa, a state where the license plate says Iowa, where white people live. But he did. He won. How did he win? And what was your role in that campaign?
Man, that's what makes the state so incredible and why I just fell in love with it when I came. The fact that there are pathways for people to succeed, whether they be folks from out of state and in the state, were just so prevalent back then. The reason why he won is because Iowa, there's certain terms that people have about Iowans, and Iowa nice is one of those that prevails. And I want to tell your viewers, first of all, we don't call ourselves Iowa nice because we think we can be nice every day out of the week. That's literally impossible and insane. We can't do that. But how I interpret nice is Iowans have this innate ability to see the human that exists in the person on the other side, despite the race, despite the skin color, despite where they come from. They know how to connect with humans. We have been conditioned to be able to do that. And I like to remind folks, nearly 100 years before Brown versus Board of Education, that major desegregation case in schools, Iowa desegregated its schools on the account of a little Black girl named Susan Clark. And by that time, we were probably 99.9% white. But it made a decision that each and every student in this state deserved access to a quality public education, despite where they lived, despite what their race was. And so coming into 2008, that caucus, I mean, there were a number of people running. You had Edwards, you had Richards, you had Clinton. I mean, we had a former governor in Iowa that was running. Vilsack was running. So many people who were interested in this seat. But Obama captured the imagination and the hopes and the dreams of Iowans, because we have always been on this journey to progress, even in the midst of backsteps. And so I was a volunteer at that time. I was a student volunteer. I was on campus. 2012 comes around. I'm like, I didn't give everything that I could have given in 2008. It was finals. There were so many things that were happening. So I said, I'm going to volunteer. And what happened is that I ended up being a full-time staffer and traveled throughout the state, engaging voters to, again, remind folks of that man, of Obama, and the contributions that he can make towards the state to move us forward. An opportunity of a lifetime,
So you worked on a bunch of other things, too. You've done a lot in your career, but I really do want to talk about your run and about Iowa. It's a fascinating state. I think we were talking before I hit record about it and my experiences there. And we have a lot of listeners there. Shout out to Kim, shout out to Mark. And I love it there. I like what you said about the people, but I will say I like Iowa City. I've been to Des Moines. You got Cedar Rapids and Davenport and Ames and Sioux City, right? But Iowa is a bunch of towns and cities, but it's also a very rural place. And so my question to you, I guess you can answer it Iowa specific or in general, there's such a cultural divide between those who live in rural areas and those who live in urban areas. And
is it though? Is it really? Because and I know that people will flock to that premise that there is a cultural divide. But man, when I'm talking to rural Iowans, they're talking about the same thing urban Iowans are talking about. Access to education. They see their jobs leaving. They're afraid to talk to their neighbor on the account that something crazy may come out of their mouth and they may be offended. These are folks that need access to housing. The culture is there. And that's what I'm trying to help people understand. We have a lot of shared struggles and a lot of shared interests. And what's fortunate for Iowa is that we're talking about the basics. And I know we're home of the Iowa Basic Skills Test, but we're getting back to basics in the state of Iowa because these are some fundamentals. We're not talking about the major presidential issues that folks are talking about on a federal level. We're talking about the basic essential mechanisms of how government should function and putting people first. That cultural divide, honestly, it's not really there. To be frank, there's this political divide, but that can be remedied. That can be remedied by helping people come to terms with where they want their communities to go 5-10 years from now, knowing that they have leadership that's going to help them get there.
Well, if that's the case, then what has been your message? How do you connect with rural voters? And sorry for putting you in the urban box because you're a Black woman, but I mean, my impression is still that you're going to have to get a certain amount of votes from maybe people who identify as Republican or conservative, or just they're white in rural areas. How do you go into those areas?
Right. I mean, it's been a part of my conditioning. I grew up originally in Mississippi.
Right. My
grandmama was a sharecropper. She started picking cotton when she was 5 years old. And as soon as she could get off the plantation, she got off. And, I connected with that part of my life, being in the state of Mississippi. I go from Mississippi, I go to high school and middle school in Oklahoma, another rural state, a very conservative state at that. But here's the thing. I wasn't growing up to learn through a Democratic lens or a conservative lens. Right. I grew up being a human being. That's how my parents raised me. So when I get up to Iowa, I don't see really anything new under the sun besides the fact that, now I know what a real Democrat is, because that part of my life, I didn't get to learn that. And so when I'm approaching folks in our rural communities, it's the same way I approach any other hard to reach community, any other community that we don't have this true understanding of how we connect with them. They're hard to reach populations, just like our Black folks, just like our Latino folks, just like our folks with disabilities. I'm meeting them where they are, asking them the question, where do you want to see your community 5-10 years from now? What are the issues that you're dealing with? Why do you live here? Why don't you live anywhere else in the country? It's hard on you in these moments. Why are you still here? And at the end of the day, most people just want to be heard because they haven't been heard. I remember traveling in 2018 and folks were telling me, Deirdre, how can I be racist when you're the first Black woman I've ever met? Well, I don't know how, but let's talk about what you want. Let's not talk about labels. Let's talk about where you want to see your community in the future, where you want to see your family. Honestly, it's just about human connection. These folks have been ignored.
Let me try it differently, though, because I realize that you have no problem connecting with anybody. And I think that's probably true often in cases of any minority, because they're the minority. They're surrounded by others and they have these experiences. My question is more about when they see you coming, and let's leave Black woman out. Let's look at me. I'm a white man. I walk up and knock on a door, in the campaign for a local BOE. And there's fewer assumptions being made. It's predominantly white. I'm a man, so whatever those assumptions come with. But the first thing they ask, Deirdre, is, are you a Republican or a Democrat? So how do you get past those politics, when they probably assume and then find out that you are a Democrat running against the governor they know, Kim Reynolds?
So what your viewers may not know about me is that I'm a former basketball coach and a championship winning coach, by the way. And we have our game plan. And right now, we're not knocking on the doors of Republicans. Right now, we're not fighting to prove a point with Republicans, correcting the record, because we spent a lot of time doing that, trying to make sure that folks know the truth. And we've been doing that for good reason, trying to correct the record. Right now, we're re-empowering Democrats because as a result of not focusing on our own, by focusing on the other side in election season, we have literally neglected our own. We saw a lot of underperformance of Democrats in 2018. And one of our highest performing years in the state of Iowa, we saw one of our lowest turnouts among Democrats, 18 to 34-year-olds, less than half of them turned out. Amongst our communities of color, less than 30% of those folks turned out. Independents, 46% of them. And so when I'm knocking on doors, I'm knocking on folks who I know are aligned with my values. They just so happen to be in our rural communities. And that's okay. Now, is there space for Republicans in this election cycle? Yeah, because they're looking for a home now. But what I'm primarily focused on in these moments is helping Democrats come to terms with the reality that you can be a part of change, that this does not have to be the status quo. That's what my game plan is. If my team isn't ready, there's no point for me to get out there and try to compete. Right now, we're getting our team ready, and we're not opposing our team. We're bringing them in and creating space for them to come in. And that's the best game plan that you could have at the start.
You're good. And I think, if you have all the resources and things go right, obviously, I think you got a great shot at this. And it's so exciting to hear your passion and your experience and the fact that you're running. It's such a, I don't know, I was going to say crazy thing to do, to run for any office. But why do you want to be the governor of Iowa?
Oh, I want to be in this office because I believe in this state. And I just see that our current governor is taking us monumental steps backwards. I mean, this is a state that was once number one in education. And I told you some of the reasons why. And now we're falling farther and farther down the list. And we see challenges with access to mental health with no remedies. We see challenges with access to regular health care, no remedies. We need 75,000 jobs filled in this state right now, today. We don't have the remedies except for the opportunity to excuse this current governor from her seat via the ballot box. I want to be governor because we have opportunity in this state to move all of us forward. I'm sure that your viewers have heard this mantra. You got to rob Peter to pay Paul. Yeah, I've unsubscribed to that notion. You got to make sure Peter's good, Paul is good, and Paul, like all of them. And that takes hard work. That takes hard work. But if that question that's out there, is democracy dead? Is it up on on top of its head? Will democracy exist 5 years from now? I believe the best place to answer that question is in the heartland in Iowa. We will answer that question in this election cycle. I'm not giving up on democracy because I know how much democracy has done for people who look like me, people who live the way I live. And so if we're going to move this country forward, Iowa's got to do its part. And I'm signing up for that task every day out of the week, because we can't survive. We can't afford for democracy not to work, because we have no other tool at this point in time.
Yeah, and I don't know that we ever will or necessarily should. But what about the health of democracy in Iowa? We often talk about it at the national level. We've seen all kinds of efforts be successful to suppress minority voters and others. What's the deal in Iowa with access to the ballot?
You know, after our Supreme Court decided they wanted to put the responsibility back in the hands of the states did what they did back in the day with our voting rights, continued to make restrictions after restrictions after restrictions, and Iowa was not immune. We used to be a state where we had 40 days of early voting. We used to be a state where individuals could help each other get to the ballot box and help them with returning their absentee votes. I mean, all of these things that were about community building. We spent $500,000 in this state searching for voter fraud, and we couldn't find it. But a couple years after that, they want to give us even more restrictions. In 2020, even more restrictions were put on our voters. And so we've got to interrupt that. We know the Supreme Court is not going to hold it down related to that access, that fundamental right to the ballot box, that the power's in the states. So we need elected representatives across these states that best represent the values of humanity, in all honesty, not politics, not profits, but see the essential mechanism of each and every person and the value that exists, regardless of whether or not I agree or disagree with their opinion. We've got to level the playing field. And under Republican leadership in this state, the playing field is becoming even more unleveled, which should not be happening in a state, especially like Iowa. We're ag state. We shouldn't be unleveling the playing field by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, an ag state that has so much potential and creates so much of the nation and the world's food. And it's so vitally important, those farmers out there and the entire industry, which is for another conversation. So you will be going up against Kim Reynolds, and it looks like, and she's the incumbent Republican. Will there be any debates?
I hope so. I hope that there will be an opportunity for us to get on the same stage and really share what our vision looks like. And more importantly, for Iowans to truly see the contrast.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a huge fan of a person by their fruits. And I'm going to talk about the fruit that I've been able to produce. And we're going to hear what she thinks she has been able to produce. And I hope Iowans will be able to see that contrast. But I'm not shying away from a debate by any stretch of the imagination.
What's the fruit you're most proud of?
And the fact that I've been able to put people first in everything that I've done, I've had the opportunity to do a variety of things. I've developed economic development programs in my state. I have developed small business development programs, especially, during this pandemic. I started my business during the recession as a young college student. And that business has been able to help more than 1,000 business owners throughout the state, including during the pandemic, when many of our businesses of color and women-owned businesses weren't getting access to PPP. I brought together a number of organizations that don't typically work together. For folks in the financial sector, banks and credit unions were at the same table. We had community colleges and four-year colleges and universities at the same table. We had our refugee communities, NAACP, LULAC, all of these nonprofits who wanted to ensure that small businesses were going to thrive. We brought it together, raised nearly $500,000 and helped more than 100 businesses throughout the state of Iowa. And had I not had a pathway to start my business, more than 15 years ago, that work would not have happened. And so I'm thinking about this state from the vantage point of we got to make sure the pathways are there for people.
Yeah.
Whether they want to embark on them or not, got to make sure the pathways are there. And under this leadership, it's just getting smaller and smaller. And so I'm proud that I was able to see that in such a way that I can do that for others.
Wow, man, after talking to you for 20 minutes, I really do hope those debates happen. That would be very interesting to watch. If you're in Iowa and you want to get on board and support Deirdre, you should do that. And even if you're not, you can still donate. But check out her website, which is DeJear for Iowa. It's all in the show notes if you want to look it up. Okay, we'll end on just the lightest and ridiculous note. I love fruit. I love your metaphor. I asked you the literal fruit. What is, if you could only have one piece of fruit, it's all you can, just one piece of fruit. What fruit do you choose? This is going to be
pineapple.
What?
Pineapple. I don't even have to think about it. Give me some pineapple.
Okay, what's the political answer though? What's the fruit that voters want you to say? I think it's
voters want me to be my authentic self, and so it's pineapple.
Well, now
I will say though, for those apple lovers, Iowa has amazing apple orchards. Amazing.
Right, there you go. That's it. It's probably should be the most whatever fruit you make the most of out there in Iowa. But I too am a pineapple person. Do you buy it and cut it up, or do you get it cut for you by?
No, so I like to buy it whole, because what I do is I use the core and I boil it in water and I make simple syrup and other types of sweeteners.
Oh, that's right. You're a foodie. You're a serious cook, which is obvious and apparent based on that crazy thing you just said about a pineapple core that I did not know was a thing. I have to go look it up. I'm not even sure I believe you, but how could I not?
Man, if you take the core and the rind and you just boil it in water and put whatever sweetener that you like in it, oh, it's just amazing. Amazing. Don't waste any of the fruit. And I do it with other fruit too. But yeah, pineapple does well.
Well, thank you so much, Deirdre, for joining me. I am really excited to hopefully talk to you again as the campaign heats up over the next few months, and wish you the best of luck. And hopefully we got a whole bunch of new supporters today.
Awesome. Thank you for the time. It's been good.
All right. How about it? Did you like her? I certainly loved talking to her. And boy, wouldn't that be amazing if she became the governor of Iowa? She's so charismatic and smart and funny and hardworking and passionate and everything that you could want in a leader. And I so enjoyed talking to her. Thank you again to Mark Nolte for hooking us up and making that happen. If you have somebody you would like for me to interview, I'd love to consider it. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, especially if they're running for governor or running for any office. We have a lot of listeners now that are stepping up and doing just that. So thank you very much for the recommendation. Thank you to Deirdre. I hope you'll check out her website, maybe consider a donation or any other kind of support. And that is all the time I've got for you here on Stand Up Today. Thank you again to Jonathan Alter, and of course to Pete Coe and John Carroll, and especially all of you for listening, and especially those who subscribe with the paid subscription, because I can't do it without that. I need to be able to make a living, support my family, and afford my gardening passion. I don't know. Where am I spending money? I need to be able to put my kids through college. That's what you're doing with your donation. You're putting my kids through college. So consider it now, standupwithpete.com. You get a full-length news show with 2 excellent guests, and my daughters get to go to college. I think it's a pretty good deal. All right. Check it out, standupwithpete.com right now, and I will talk to you tomorrow, where I'll be joined by Dr. Aaron Carroll and the authors of a new book about the state of the cannabis business in the United States of America and where we are headed. I think you're really going to like that conversation as well, and always with Dr. Carroll. Okay, that's it. Be the change you want to see in the world. Bye-bye.
Better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand